All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have about 215 people in this Zoom meeting for the updates to the new RPA. We're grateful that each of you took time out of your schedule to be with us to learn what the new RPA looks like and the different changes to it. Our presenter, I should introduce myself real quick. My name is Tommy Dutcher. I'm the area sales manager for California Title Company. And our trainer presenter today is Mary Jane Morris with Granite Escrow. MJ.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. One last time, if you just joined us, the RPA is in the chat for you to copy. And then I'm going to stop saying that now that we've said that many times. I want to give just some quick shout outs. I've said hello to Tommy. Thank you, Tommy, as always, for running tech and keeping me looking good. As you do for all of us here. I see Tracy Hussey, our Mission Valley rep from Granite Escrow. I see, I think Sam's out there, Samantha Mann-Hayes. I see Lisa Ludwin, the other transaction coordinator group leader. I see, there's so many of you, I'm not sure if John is out there. John, are you out there? John is our La Jolla rep. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet Andrew Wertheim, the lawyer, he's a local real estate and estate attorney that we've been lucky enough to have him come on and solve problems for us. So we want you guys to know he's out there too. And without further ado, we're going to jump in. So we're getting a new RPA, top to bottom. So the last time we got a new RPA was January 2002, and that's when the 7 and 17 day rule came in. Previous to that, we had a passive contract with all kinds of dates, 3, 5, 7, 14, all kinds of dates. So the last time we had a full rebuild was January 2002. C.A.R asked me to tell you that when they add on to the contract as they've done over the last 20 years or so, it's like having a house and you keep having kids and you just keep adding a room for the kids and the house finally is oddly shaped, and that's what's happened to the RPA. So not only did they want to fix some things in there, but they wanted a chance to reformat. So the first news that you need is that well, let's talk about dates. The new contract will drop in November and will appear side by side with the existing contract so that you guys can start using it the minute it drops. You're free to start using it. December 20th, the old contract disappears, will not be available any further in your zip form. So if you aren't ready by Christmas to make the swap, you may get sort of pushed into it. Anyway, I'd like to start with the PowerPoint real quick, Tommy, and let's knock out just a few basic questions and then we'll get into the form itself.
Yep, give me one sec here.
Okay. So we did go to 16 pages, which makes everybody gasp every time I tell them. But part of the reason that we did was because they changed the formatting and the size of the font. So yes, we got some new stuff, but it is also because we got larger font so that it's more readable and less what they call a fine print contract. So let's start with who did this to you? Who was the people that were making these decisions? There were I don't need to read it to you, but these are the agents and brokers that were and what size their firms were and that were in the study group. And by the way, we were supposed to get this time last year, but we had another national event going on. So we decided that we would push that off until this year. So we have many things, the moratorium ending, we have the new contract coming. So it's still going to be a busy fourth quarter, right into the first quarter. Next slide, Tom, please. What's the same? Pretty much everything's the same. It's pretty much business as usual as far as the basic rules. You know, there's one big exception that you'll need to know, which is that the 21 days for loans is gone. We have gone back to 7 and 17, the basic fundamental rules, 7 days for sellers to disclose and 17 days for a buyer to escape a transaction. If they are, if you didn't negotiate those dates down in this, I have to turn my phone off because it won't stop. Sorry about that. All right, it's off now. All right. Next slide, Tommy. I want to get into the contract. These are the things that are staying the same: mandatory mediation, optional liquidated damages, notice to perform process remains exactly the same. We are still an active contract. Meaning if you like or don't like something, you are, you have to say so, which is why we have contingency removals. Contingency removals do not just passively remove themselves as they did prior to 2002. Next slide. So the format, all the negotiation points were moved to the front of the contract. We're going to be talking about that today. So one of the things you have to hear me that I'm going to say repeatedly today is some things are in the grid. The amount of time or who's paying for it is in the grid. The rules that go with those things are still back in the body of the contract. So we're going to talk to you. We'll talk to you about that as we get into the contract itself. This is very similar to the summary form if you were using that previously. And there is now a direct correlation in the grid to what paragraph you would be discussing. So that when a client asks you for the details of something, you don't have to try to remember where it is. It'll make you look smoother when you're working with clients. Next slide. I mentioned the paragraphs, no surprise hidden check boxes way back in the body of it, hidden somewhere where you can't see them and you forget to, sorry, the people who are still coming in and still showing up on my screen.
Yep, I'll let them in.
All contingency periods default to the same. So time changes are very easy to see, and we've got some nice new buildings of things we've always had to previously write in separately. Next slide. There's now more space between the lines and paragraphs and added subparagraphs to make it easier to read. The separate addenda. So all the things that we all like to attach. Some of us are hardcore SBSA people. We want to attach that day one to the purchase contract. Some of us have got the market condition advisor. Whatever the things are that you attach additionally to a contract are now specifically mentioned that it does not make it a fully executed contract. So the rules that we've always followed, that if you got only the contract or 45 pages from somebody to make it fully executed, you had to have executed everything they sent over in the beginning. That's not going to be true anymore. It's just the escrow package itself, and the contract lays out what is not necessary any longer to have to get to your lender or to get to your escrow. You won't hear from a lender that they don't have a fully executed contract because some form is not there. So if it's an addenda, it stays an addenda at this point. So one thing you guys need to know, and it's going to come up in the purchase contract here, is that there are no more, in December, there will be no more mobile home contracts, and there will be no more probate contracts. Those two documents are become addenda now, and the things that you have to do, like permanent foundation or those kinds of things that you like to put on those kinds of forms, are going to be addendas now. So there's not going to be a mobile home purchase contract. As a former broker myself, and in fact, I'm sorry, I raced right in. I didn't really introduce myself. I'm Mary Jane with Granite Escrow. I'm the Temecula Riverside rep. I grew up in the business. I was an escrow officer for 20 years. I decided to go be a realtor and got invited to be an office manager, and I have been an operating manager or broker for another 20 years. I was just getting ready to retire when Granite Escrow said, why let all that experience go to waste? Come teach for us and sign things for us. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 18 months or so. So so more space, clear designation, separate addenda, not part of. So the reason I mentioned who I was, thank you for sticking with me while I came full circle there, was I have always said, and it has always been true, that an RPA is good for any kind of purchase anywhere. You don't have to have a mobile home contract. You don't have to have a probate contract. You don't need those. You can write on them. But I've often seen people getting their offers sent back, especially on mobile homes, that they wanted on the home contract and that sort of thing. So that will clear that issue up right there. It's now going to be the RPA with a mobile home addendum if you do a bunch of mobile homes. All right, next one, Tommy, I think we're just about done here. They reorganized the signature pages. Buyer and seller are on the same page now, and real estate agents and escrow are on their own page now. They also built in the RCSD forms, hoping that you would be able to identify your entity buyers, LLCs, corporations, trusts, power of attorneys, that you'd be able to build those in. I'll talk about that a little more when we get in the contract now about how reasonable that's going to be, but the RCSD form will still be available as a standalone form, but they've now attempted to build it into the purchase contract as well to bring it to everybody's attention at the time of offer. All right. They also provided more space and more room for signatures for when you're putting in the DocuSign, or you've got 2 agents and 2 brokers and that sort of thing. So, and we're going to talk about a brand new delivery method. This is pretty important, and we won't get to the very end. So let me just take a minute and say, to be listening at the end for the new delivery method. So at the bottom of the counteroffer, or the bottom of our existing RPA, there's a place where we've always had the agents acknowledge when it was received, although we mostly uniformly ignored it because we know that only a seller or buyer can make it a transaction. So acceptance has always been counted from when the last person signed the offer, and that still is true. But now you are going to, in the future, and we're going to talk about this on the last page, you are going to give a specific email that you want for delivery. And if the person puts it in that email will now stand as delivery time. They are pulling off all of those little boxes at the bottom that we argue over whether they need to be signed, initialed, all that sort of stuff. All that stuff is coming off. Tommy, is it possible to unmute Samantha?
Yes.
Okay. Sam, just in case you have a comment or anything for me at any time, I want to make sure that you can speak. For those who don't know, that's Samantha Mann. She runs the national TC group, and then somewhere in our group is Lisa Ledwin, who runs the California group. So the next slide, please. All right, I think we're ready to share a presenter here, and let's get started on the purchase contract. I'm okay, share screen.
Yep.
And I want that one and share. Can you see it?
Yeah, can you make it bigger?
Yeah, the best I can do. Let's see, maybe, yes. Hey, look at that, I'm so smart these days. You are still getting a baby boomer working your tech, so thank goodness for Tommy. All right, so, all right, you guys can see the purchase contract, and we're starting at the date prepared. Tommy, I'm going to stop admitting people. I'm just going to
got it.
Take care of that. Thank you. So the date prepared. The only reason I'm going to go over this is because you cannot believe, and the transaction coordinators will say hallelujah when I tell you how many people don't realize that that is just the contract date. When you fill out an addendum or anything else later down the road, and it says date of contract, that's the date prepared. They have used every language under the sun. We have conversations with agents all the time where they think it's the acceptance date that should be used, that sort of thing. So I just want to say that contract date simply means the date it was prepared. And for those of you who lived through the short sale market, you know that we closed on some contracts that were 1 and 2 or more years old from when they had originally been typed to when we finally used them. So date prepared is just that. You will notice in paragraph 1 that they have removed the sales price and the close of escrow because they're now down in the grid. So this is a basic, who am I and what property am I buying in paragraph 1. Agency and those rules have remained the same, but there was one I wanted to point out to you, this line here. We're not legally required, and CAR does not insist that we swap agencies with each other like we've always done. We want the listing agent's agency, and the listing agent needs our agency. You have an obligation to do your agency for your own file, but you don't have to swap them anymore. I don't know that a lot of people will stop doing that, but just so you know where the rule is, it's not required to swap agencies. Okay, before close of escrow. And then in 2C, the very last line, I want to remind you that you are a dual agent if your company has more than one branch. If you're a Century 21 and your offer's coming from the other same Century 21 and that has the same owner, that is still a dual agent transaction. So another, in my area, Allison James is another common one where the San Diego branch might be dealing with the Riverside branch, and they will often not indicate they are dual agency when they in fact are. All right, so we are now into the grid. This is the box. You see this box here, and number A, you have your choice of to put in a sales price, and then to the far right is where you're now noting if it's all cash, right? So purchase price, all cash. B is this where your close of escrow goes now, where you again can put in number of days or particular closing date if you have something in mind. Expiration of offer in number C used to be way in the back on page 10 of the purchase contract, and now the expiration of the offer is up front, and it does let you know that it's 3 days after the buyer signs. In the short sale market, that was very helpful because at least you knew you could go on to the next transaction. Having never heard from the REO agent, you would know that that offer had expired and was gone. There's no reason you can't continue to perform on an offer that has expired, but if you need to walk away and you're not getting answers or nobody's replying, it has dropped dead at 3 days. I'm going to talk about D1 now, initial deposit amount. You'll see that there's an amount or a percentage you can do there. I circled the percentage 3 times down into the next groups. All of those percentage spots will calculate the amount for you the first time. It does not recalculate them for you once you go to counter offer and all that. You will have to do it the old-fashioned way, but you can put in initial deposit amount of 3% if that's what you want, and it will calculate it automatically for you. On the far right in D1, I want you to see that deposit is still due within 3 days, just like always. And then I marked the box, any acceptable method. And the only reason I wrote that there was because later when we get to the rule that matches the grid, as I warned you, we would have to be discussing in two different ways. If I don't know how many of you remember, but when we first went to defaulting to wire transfers, some escrow companies were not accepting checks at the door while your client stood in the lobby having driven for hours to drop off his deposit check. This was a very annoying 6 months. And so they have fixed it that it does default to wire, but in the further paragraphs in the back, it says, or any method acceptable to escrow. So as long as you don't bring in a bag of pennies or something, a cashier's check or a deposit, you can bring in a personal check if you want as well, even though it did default to wire transfer. Increased deposit, this is where I told you were going to get some opinion and some fact. I wanted to remind most of my buyer's agents that you do not want to increase your own deposit on page 1 of the purchase agreement because it does make it liquidatable as part of the entire contract. So if a seller needs to, or if a listing agent needs to counter your deposit up higher, they need to follow up and do what was the RID form and is now going to be the demand for increased deposit form instead. But if that form never gets done, the second part of an increased deposit is not liquidatable. So there are times when you will increase your own deposit. Maybe an investor wants to put 25 down now, have a quick inspection, and then another 25. So I'm not saying it never happens, but for your routine buyer, don't increase your own deposit on page 1. And as a listing agent, if you do ask for increased deposits, make sure that your GC or you know to get the receipt for increased deposit or the new form out, or it will not be liquidatable. I have one more tip for you on the initial deposit amount, and the reason I have chosen over and over again to say this in the RPA classes is because so many people don't know it. 3% is limited to owner occupied 1 to 4. If the buyer is not going to owner occupy, coming in, it's an investor, you can liquidate any amount you put on there. So don't feel like you have to hold an investor to 3%. I think we've all seen those proof of funds where they've got 5 million in the bank and can't close on time because they didn't get their money out of the previous transaction. It's very frustrating. So feel free on an investor to pick it up above 3%. All right, so the loan amount in E1, you will see has the 17 days circled on the page there. Tommy, how do I use the pointer here? I'll figure it out.
Like that?
And you'll see the purchase contract does still default to conventional, or you can check it into FHA or VA or seller financing, those types of things. But there's where your loan goes. And then E2, if you happen to be doing a CHAPA or something where you're going to have a second loan contingency going into the transaction. If you fill out box E2 because you do have a second, city grant or something going in there, it does cause you to have 2 loan contingencies, and they will both need to be removed at some point. E3 is where your occupancy type is going. Of course, everybody tries to do primary because it's a little cheaper to get a loan as a first-time home buyer. And there are some situations where the lender can do it for you for your children if you're buying repeat non-occupying co-borrower situations. But your lender will need to know whether this is not a primary transaction.
So in the chat real quick, somebody did ask, shouldn't it say loan contingency removal prior to the 17-day line?
It is, yeah, they should. Yes, I agree. Actually somebody else caught that too, but it is going to be back in the rules that match the grid as well. In fact, thank you for that reminder. Over here where the E2, E1, right next to that is the paragraph number that takes you directly to the rules that match that clause in the back of the contract. So if I want to talk about E1, I can see that it's on it's in paragraph 5C1 of the purchase contract going forward. That'll help you, like I said, look a little smoother when you're having to check the rules in front of a client. All right, I'm starting at the top of page 2. Somebody's ringing my bell. I apologize for that. They now have a spot for a seller credit. And if you'll see on the far right, they've already assigned it to closing costs. They did not say recurring or non-recurring closing costs, but they got us halfway there by saying closing costs. So hopefully that'll eliminate one amendment immediately after we get into escrow, where we have to declare it for closing costs. On H1, 2, and 3, you will see that verification of the funds, verification of down payment, and verification of loan application are now defaulting to attached. I think we've all long felt that we didn't want to look at an offer that didn't have those things attached. And now if you cannot attach them, you will have to mark the box and explain why you can't do that. Otherwise, it's now presumed that you will have all of those things when you submit the offer. On number I, you will notice, and this is going to be true of the letter O as well, it is intentionally left blank. C.A.R did left paragraph I and letter O blank because they felt it looked too much like the number 1 or the number 0. So I has nothing in it on purpose, and neither does O. Your final verification, your walkthrough in J is 5 days as usual, and you'll see that they've included an assignment request as well. The intention is for those people who know that the investors and the flippers and people who need to bring in another borrower, that sort of thing, to close the transaction. They're asking that you come to that conclusion by the time the contingencies are ready to come out and not in the last few minutes of the transaction. It often does create an entire re-sign of the file at the last minute when everyone's frustrated, and there is no avoiding a re-sign on a file if we assign out. They have a couple exceptions now, which will make the transaction coordinators happy, I know at least, that if it's a trust entity. Sam, what's the other one? I can't think what the other one is right now. It's a trust and a wholly owned LLC or something like that. They don't need to re-sign.
If it's a trust, LLC, any type of corporation, and it was anything that is basically the same signer that would be part of the entity, we don't have to do the whole switch over right now. But if it's a completely different signer, you still have to do the AOAA. So if you suddenly switch between LLCs and have John Smith signing for LLC ABC, and you had Mary Smith signing for 123 LLC, you do need a new AOA and a signer.
Parties remain the same, you can avoid it, but if not, you need to re-sign your file top to bottom from the RPA. And by the way, escrow is always going to need the RPA signed, but they will not ask for your disclosure. So if you don't think of it as a top to bottom sign, you're going to wind up doing it twice. Because you're going to do the RPA, you're going to have to do the contract and then separately do the disclosure. Right. We're into the appraisal contingency on L2. It does still default to 17 days unless you shorten it. And it also has this new phrase that I pointed out with the red arrow that says that this is the minimum of the property. So the buyer is willing to assume responsibility up to a certain price. This is where they can cap their overage fee on the appraisal if they wish, or if you guys need a place to do that. I want to remind all of you that and then on the far right, I underlined a rule: removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in FHA or VA transactions. Buyers who are FHA or VA, no matter whether or not they have removed their appraisal contingency, can still cancel over and get their deposit back. So for FHA and VA, waiving of the appraisal is not sufficient to retain their deposit. Okay. Investigation of property is 17 days, and right below it is informational access to the property. This is one that listing agents are going to want to keep an eye on, because how many people have found that very excited buyer sitting in their car out front of the house looking at the house, or calling that wants, say, their parents to come in and look, or wants to bring somebody to measure for carpet or that sort of thing. So investigation for 17 days or however long you make it is one thing. Access to the property is a whole separate thing, and unless you catch it, it's definitely going to go to 17 days for them to come in for informational access to the property, so they can bring mom and dad. All right. All right. I want you to see in L7 that the review of leased or liened items has been permanently added to the purchase contract, which is great, because it's one of the things I was always teaching my agents to build into their purchase contract, that you would like to be disclosed on the solars and water softeners and alarm systems and those sorts of things in the first 17 days of the transaction. There are several places in here where they remind us over and over again that turning in things late to the buyer will trigger 5 days, and they have repeated it so many times that I can't help but think that the number of times that people are going to want to use that 5 days is going to go up as well. So they're really putting the pressure on the listing agents to get those disclosures out. As we all know, we have the same problems with HOAs and things we've always had, but they really want those things out. And we will be talking about AVIDs, but for the listing agent, that is now part of the statutory. If you make good notes on page 3 of the TDS and do your AVID later, and do not mark that it's part of the TDS, you could still be in delivery. and do your ABID later. But if you're a person who marks that box, if it or your company, we know lots of people know that the company's going to want it, so they'll go ahead and mark that box. Once you've done that, as a listing agent, if you don't deliver it, it is not full delivery of the transfer disclosure statement and could trigger a 5-day delay. The COP form that used to be buried beyond the costs and all that is now in L8. You see there, that's where the COP goes. Time of possession has been altered slightly. It still says or 6 p.m., which is what most of us are going to still be marking. But I wanted you to notice the new language upon notice of recordation of title. We often use the example that if a title records at 3:05 and the house burns down at 3:15, the seller and buyer could be confused as to whose house burnt down. And we often would go to the title company and say, what was the exact time of recording so that we know whose house burnt down. So strictly speaking, if that 6 p.m. box isn't marked and the title company gets the phone call and says it's recorded at 2:17 p.m., the buyer has rights to those fees at 2:17 p.m. So this law has been just realigned to match, this rule has been realigned to match the actual law. They are the owners of the property from the moment of recording forward and have entitlement to possession unless otherwise marked. So most of us use the 6 o'clock, but for people who have to help other agents like myself, Sam, the other transaction coordinators in the room, sometimes knowing a little trick like that will benefit you when you really need it, or you will know that you're about to get hit with it. And so it's a good thing to know. I'm going to talk about M3, tenant occupied properties. For those of you who had, first of all, you know you should not record with a tenant in the property and ever, and certainly not now, while the COVID restrictions are still going on. And we are all the way to October 1 in California before we will start to see those released. We already know that small claims and all those are going to be slammed. It's going to be a big, small claims has actually been for emergency uses now. We'll be hearing tenant cases, even if they exceed the amount that's available for small claims. So right now, to file a small claims court, you are not getting a date until the end of 2022. And as soon as these the moratorium ends, you're probably going to be looking at 2023 to get a date in small claims court or an eviction. So the previous form we had was a TIP form, tenant in possession form, and it was really a useless form. All it said was, I promise to get you a copy of the lease and a few of the things that the person has. Otherwise, you're in possession. You've accepted that client. We can never accept a tenant without looking at the lease, their payment history, all those sorts of things, and decide if you want them to be a tenant. So we're getting a new form called the TOPA. I have not seen it yet. I saw a very light draft, but I have not seen it. But the TOPA form is supposed to be more encompassing now. That will help you not accidentally accept a tenant in the property before you know whether you want them to be in the property after close of escrow. The documents and fees compliance, the seller delivery of documents is 7 days or shorter. For the benefit of my escrow staff, I have been preaching that the rule that the general provisions of escrow instructions, not the whole package with everything that they need to do, but just those 5 or 6 pages that say it's that we're authorized to do things for you, are supposed to be signed even now in this purchase contract within 5 days. It is, I laughed at it when it came out, and I'm laughing at it now because sometimes we don't have enough, or the full is, you've opened escrow, but it's not fully executed or something's happened. So I'm warning buyers agents for that one. Don't get triggered that you can get a notice to perform by not kicking up I kick them up to 10 days. Escrow will certainly have had a chance to type, to clean it, clear it up, and give you general provisions. But general provisions are a part of your disclosures. And right now the law sets it at 5. So I'm recommending that you pick that particular date up as a buyer's agent. HOA docs now have to be paid for in 3 days, and it is established by law that the seller must pay. And they must now install the smoke alarms, the CO detectors and the water heater bracing within 7 days, and more specifically ahead of the appraisal. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're going to penalize those sellers who don't finish up or don't do these things up front. Now, sometimes we have an elderly person or something, and just keep in mind that if the smoke alarms are not in, if the CO detector is not there, and the water heating bracing is not done, it is now going to become, any additional inspection fees are now going forward going to be a seller charge, even though they're coming from the lender. So they run about $150 per reinspection. That cost is held pretty firm over the year, but I don't know if them knowing that the sellers are going to be paying it now might raise those fees. Also, we've seen inflation in general across everything with the supply chain breaks and all those sort of things. So it's very likely that sellers are going to miss that one. So that's another thing that has to be done to be in full compliance before you cancel a buyer for non-compliance. Okay?
MJ?
Yeah.
Going to go ahead and ask a couple questions while we're on this section, because I think they'll get diluted on the back end if we ask it. So one question came up, it says, is it actually installing them? Or because it used to be that they just had to be there. I've seen where they just leave them on the counter prior to appraisal.
With a nice clean new battery. I see that a lot too, but no, they have to be installed and testable.
Okay, and the second question that was asked is, what about agents that say they're going to pay the upfront fee for the HOA docs? Can they legally do that?
Yeah, I joke all the time. In fact, the people who know me well have heard me say this joke so many times that in my trust agreement for my family, I have it that that's what I want on my headstone. Everything is negotiable. So yes, we certainly may by mutual agreement agree that something else is going to happen, but sellers who positively think they can escape that, as we went through in the short sale market, where they just, whether or not they had money because they were in a short sale, they would often say they didn't, and we would be stuck with no HOA docs. So it does need to, we want the seller to take it serious. So we're trying to, also, for those of you who ever tried to cancel on a buyer, if you haven't turned in everything you were supposed to give them, they can hit you with a notice to perform just as easily for those items and hold up the cancellation and start claiming the 5 days and all that. So they're trying to make it a little, the CAR believes and the law believes that sellers have time to do these things. They've had time to think about it. They've had time to interview 5 people. They've reviewed contracts. They've fallen out of escrow once. So excuses on the seller side are less viable than they are on the buyer side for a person who just came into a property they've never laid eyes on before.
Okay, and one last, Marissa Charles just wants to verify, just to confirm the TOPA is replacing the TIP.
Totally replacing it. Yep.
Okay.
And then number O, you can see there is again intentionally left blank so that we can, we don't accidentally mistake it for a 0. Hey, at the top of page 3, we're talking about the items included and excluded. So they've added some things here: video doorbells, security equipment, security alarms. I added a few little broker ones that I have for you. Is the fridge in the garage staying too? And are they swapping it and taking the good one from the front room and putting the crappy one from the garage inside? So I have also had the one that Cart has pre-marked for you is bathroom mirrors. That has literally been a nightmare now for a couple of years. Many of us of the female persuasion like to visit home goods and make our homes beautiful, and they often have these gorgeous mirrors, and when we go to walk through, they're gone. This was different from the years where we all just got the big slab mirror. You know, the builder grade slab mirror had always been there. So bathroom mirrors are starting to become an issue. Car charging stations, water fountains, features, garage cabinets. I've had that happen more than once, where they went in and all the beautiful white cabinetry was gone. It was never discussed. As we get down into the rules that go with the grid, as I separated out in your mind earlier, Pool equipment is, drapes and things are going to be outlined in a more clear method so that people aren't taking the pretty parts and leaving the bare bones windows and calling it done. I want to talk about excluded items, although it seems very simple to you. One of the things that I remind people is that all CAR forms are designed for maximum use by whether you're new in the business or been in the business a long time. And they are in fact a sort of checklist. So if you're not a template user or you're a very confident template user, you can scan these items and it should trigger your mind to remind yourself if you need something gone from the property as well. The car on blocks in the front yard, the shed falling down, the kids' swing set. We just had I just watched it go across Facebook, a whole argument about a kid's swing set. And then I think the TC that had to argue about that's on our group today. So, and we have a new rule regarding excluded things, which I'm going to get to in the back. So please think of excluded things you want out of the property as well when you are negotiating. I'm now down to the allocations of costs, and the big changes you need to know there are Q5 and 6. Now, those are exactly the ones that have always been. I think there's, Sam, remind me, 7A and B, something like that in the existing contract. And in Riverside County, we buyers mark them and sellers take them out all the time because we didn't have any point of sale or water retrofit rules. But with the defensible space laws that have come into this, into us, which by the way, is a whole nother hour I have to do for you guys because it's really a very serious, and we're only 2 parts into it. But for now, a government requirement may be a defensible space. So, and that includes vacant land. There is part of the law that applies to the structure, and there's part of the law that requires to the land. So even if it's vacant land, we're going to have defensible space inspections. And so when you get countered out on those things, you will need to maybe be more specific. Or when you are writing in the first place, you can put in the defensible space inspection. While it is not a point of sale item yet, although it is being talked about, it is a requirement. And one of the biggest dangers is that we have no case law on this yet. We are completely a new law. And so it comes down to, I'm gonna hit you, Sarah, in just a second, Sam. So it comes down to, they're saying you do not want to be the lucky winner that finds out that property needed a 50 grand worth of clearing or that sort of stuff after you close escrow. I want to let Sam get her thought in there real quick. What's up?
Oh, just real quick, because I know we're doing multiple counties here. The issue is it's not just county, it's also city. City of Escondido, it is a point of sale requirement. It always has been, the way San Diego has the water retrofit as point of sale. And I know I've talked directly to both local fire here in San Diego proper, and also we talked to for Cal Fire. As far as they're concerned, it's point of sale. As far as the state and C.A.R. are concerned currently, it is not. And the issue is they are from the notice of citation is 30 days, where the documents we're using are 12 months. So be aware of where you are selling the property, what type of property. Use that home hardening map, pull it up. It's better to have the discussion even before you write the offer. Just take a look at it and make sure you're being aware. Err on the side of caution because these are going to become point of sale requirements. COVID's delayed a lot of things on this whole topic. So just cover yourself, and it would behoove you to start utilizing that fire map.
And that's a form that we have right now. So we had one come out in January and disappear in July. And now we have the one that is a 2-part, like a smoke and water. The top half is for home hardening and the bottom half is for defensible space. That form is intended for 3 purposes. You can use it for negotiation, you can use it as an advisory, or you can use it as a disclosure. So all of those are correct. Now, the entire industry has got their self in a wad about it. And some brokers are accepting it, some aren't, some are insisting all the way through, even though they didn't negotiate anything. There's a box on there that you can mark that the buyer will do his own defensible space up to a year after close of escrow. And that's the part that C.A.R is warning us about as a risk manager, that we may wind up with deals bouncing back when they find out that the yard work had to be done. And then I shouldn't do it, but I'm going to do one more second on this. CAL FIRE has also said that although we're all used to the 100-foot defensible space, they're asking you to pull couches off patios, things you drug out of the house that are upholstered. They are getting rid of bark, decorative bark that is up against the house. They are calling out shakes shingles for those who still have patio covers that are falling down. And a class recently taught by C.A.R down in San Diego says that when the third and fourth part of this come along, there's going to be civil and criminal penalties for avoiding and being potentially a part of a wildfire that you could have avoided. Not to mention just cleaning up the lot and what's it cost to do that. We have I know one of our agents on here has already had an experience where $100,000 lien got filed on a property for ignoring a defensible space instruction. They will go out and do it for you if they think it's a hazard, and you will get a bill. So I hated to go off on a tangent on those right there, but this is a good place to start using those to address defensible space arguments when you are when you're writing off. Escrow fees have pretty much stayed the same. They added a little box to say each to pay their own fees so that you don't have to rewrite that every single time. And then the owner's title policy, which has always been there, is there. And to the far right, you can say who you want to do them. On Q9, apparently many buyers did not understand that there is a second title policy, a much less expensive title policy called the lender's policy, that the buyer pays for the benefit of the lender. So there's nothing to negotiate there. It is just a buyer's charge. But in the interest of transparency, both title policies are now there. So the owner's one that you've always been used to, and then the buyer's one that doesn't need any boxes checked or anything. It just says the buyer's going to pay for that. Okay. On Q12 and 13, you'll see that the seller box is fixed by law for who's preparing disclosures and who's certifying. A certification is what a lender gets, which is a mini version of an HOA package to verify that the property has certain conditions that they are that they need to know to do the loan. I wanted to point out in Q14, I circled transfer fees, and on the far right, I circled it. This is for the benefit of escrow holders. If something turns up on a HOA demand that talks about a move out fee, it will be automatically charged to the seller. If it is a move in fee, it will be automatically charged to the buyer. And so you may see things that you didn't know that came off the HOA demand. And the way the law is going to let escrow lean toward it to avoid some additional amendments is it generally is going to be your problem if the seller's problem if they're moving out, and the buyers if it's a move-in cost. All right, this next one on Q18 is one of my favorite changes, and buyers agents or buyer side now orders the home warranty, period, end of it, it's over. We've all had that debate over the years that the law strictly says that if you didn't ask for exactly what you wanted, or it costs more than you intended it to, that there had to be an amendment. I don't know how many $5 amendments I've written in my career, but a bunch. So now buyer, all you guys are negotiating is how much and from whom, and the others, the buyer side, whoever, whether you're the agent or you have a TC, the buyer side will be ordering. And if it overflows, back in the language, it already says the buyer will pay the difference. Okay. So you now no longer have to accidentally forget AC or want to add pool or want to add roof, and the other side could previously turn you down because you didn't ask for it that way, or you would need an addendum. This is going to close that box so that the home warranty is now, so it is permanently switching that the buyer side. Now, I think this is there are a lot of listing agents who have advertising agreements with home warranty companies, and they need to be able to prove how much business they're doing. So I'm not, and I have to tell you, back in the day when I was a transaction coordinator, I really didn't care if either agent's names got on there if the buyers got exactly what they wanted and the cost was right. So if you have a deal with your home warranty company to pay part of your costs because of an advertising agreement, you may have to take the responsibility on yourself or make some new arrangements because buyer side's going to be ordering it and you won't necessarily get credit for it on the listing side, which many listing agents are used to having that privilege. All right, I'm at the top of page 4. This is where your addendas come in. So the probate addendum is there, the manufactured home purchase agreement, and I might even once in a while use the tenant occupied form addendum. But these other two, honestly, my whole career, I've never had to do this kind of transaction where I had a tenancy in common or a stock cooperative. And there is a spot for another, but this is where, if you are a manufactured home or doing a probate, you're going to have to draw in this form, and you draw it in by clicking the box, and C.A.R will add it as they've been doing to the package that you're doing, the package that you're creating. Other addendum, you want to attach an addendum with a whole bunch of instructions or a backup offer or the septic and well, short sales, court confirmation, all of these other addendas now have a place for you to check the boxes. But please notice in number C that they say that these advisories below are provided for reference and are not not intended to be incorporated as to make it a fully executed contract. So we talked about that before. If you're a big state, if you want to add this statewide every time, it does not have to come back with the offer, and it is not part of a fully executed package, even if it went over with the package. So these are the ones that are not going to be considered fully executed part of your contract that we talked about earlier. 5A1, I've underlined the line, any method acceptable is any method that is unacceptable to escrow holder. I think they got a typo there, huh? Any method that is unacceptable to escrow holder. Is that a typo, Sam? That sure looks like, am I reading that crazy? Sure looks like a typo. All right, increased deposit. The deposit will be made in the same manner you did the first deposit, no making up new problems. If you dropped off a check, drop off a check. If you're wiring a wire. And then please remember that increased deposits are not liquidatable if you don't have the DID form or what was previously the RID form.
MJ?
Yeah.
Real quick, Kathleen asked, should the buyer's agent note in the other section if they want termite clearance?
Yes, all the things you usually build in, pest control, section 1, those sort of things that you guys know by now why they're out. They don't want sellers to be agreeing to things they haven't had a chance to know the cost of yet. But I have never failed to build it in when I had to write an offer, and I wouldn't blame you a bit if you built it in. I like to think that the listing agent and the seller have pre-run, especially with these new rules that everything with 5 days is going to be a problem. If it can give you 5 days to be a problem, whether or not it's going to be part of your purchase agreement, you can't negotiate unless you can't negotiate wholeheartedly without knowing if you're going to have a huge termite bill. I've seen it over and over again where people feel like, well, you nickel and dime to me all the way, especially in this market where you got $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 out of me. And now you have a $5,000 report that you won't discuss with me. So it's now, if you have a $5,000 report as a seller, counter it out. Say, here it is, and counter it out. Okay. I'm not saying you have to pay for it, but knowledge is power when it comes to termite reports. And I'm doing paragraph 5A3 now. C.A.R is asking and has asked all certified trainers to say this to you all, that stop telling clients that they can or cannot get their deposit back. It is an act of law. Stop saying that. Yes, I am very careful and I know the rules and I can count and I know if my deposit is likely to be returned. And that's the kind of thing you need to be saying. It is not a guarantee that they're going to get the deposit back, and the seller may choose to take it all the way to a court opinion in certain circumstances. The other thing C.A.R asked us to tell you is that there is no such thing as a non-refundable deposit. So when we write that after 3 days, your deposit goes hard and you're not getting it back, not true. Okay? There is no such thing as a non-refundable deposit. They are subject to the rules of our contract, which goes by dates and then by mediation, and then either, if it's outside of small claims, a major lawsuit, or a minor one in small claims. But C.A.R says there are too many phone calls where people have been told that they're not getting their deposit back. And C.A.R is asking us to stop practicing law. So we have a new rule in C3 here on this page. The seller side is now fully authorized to speak to the lender anytime they want throughout the entire transaction, and we are now authorized to do so. The lender has, with the obligation of this, has an obligation to tell you what's going on. Furthermore, if you change lenders, you are now required to tell them in 1 day. That does not mean they can cancel you. That means that you may be under pressure for new time and not be able to get any more time from them, because that's the way it has always worked. But in 1 day, if you change lenders, you must notify the listing side that you have changed lenders and provide the same proofs as though it's day one: verification of funds, proof of loan viability, that sort of thing. So 1 day. I've been getting a lot of questions about when this 1 day happens. Ethically, I think we all know when it happens, but I have been joking that certainly it means from 1 day of getting caught. Okay? So the minute the escrow pops up and tells your listing agent that there's a new lender calling them, time's running. Okay? So it's very important that you know now that the seller has the right. And then in paragraph 4, there's a last sentence there that starts with notwithstanding seller's agreement that buyer may obtain FHA. Just because a buyer agreed to an FHA or a VA transaction does not mean they agreed to pay the cost. That is a very common broker question. Well, it was FHA and here's the expenses. Like, well, it doesn't mean that the seller's agreed to pay anything. Just because he's accepted an FHA or VA transaction. That is something you kind of have to go into the contract knowing. The two big things on an FHA and a VA are, my client solid and is the property solid. If you're going to have problems on either one of those, you should be aware of it going in. Limits on credits to buyer. Not only can you not exceed the limit that the lender puts on the transaction, but there may be already credits that the lender has given as a part of the type of loan the person got, or because they needed it and the lender was able to fit something back in. So most limits on credits are 3 or 6% of the loan, which is some pretty good amount of room, mostly, usually 3%. However, if you are unable to spend all the money you got, buyer does not get change and cannot move that money anywhere else and cannot change the sales price to accommodate for the lost amount of money. A really good example I had of this was two agents who were going back and forth over a $10,000 pool repair. And finally, to get it done at the last minute, the seller authorized a $10,000 credit. The buyer's agent immediately called back and said that we can't receive the money that way. And it triggered a whole nother round of whether the seller wants to pay it off his side of the transaction. Seller didn't want to pay it in the first place. And now you're asking him to not credit you, but pay a bill for you. So please remember that there is no change and you cannot have more credits than the lender will allow. So I want to point out number C, which is at the top of page 5. This is the sentence that if you read it sounds like we relied on the type of loan you're getting and we are counting on you being an ethical person and not completely lying to us about the type of transaction you're going to get. However, if you have to change, please notify us in 1 day And we don't necessarily owe you more time to do it. Buyer may change loans or type of financing all the way through the transaction as many times as he wants if he doesn't cause the seller to kick him out because he runs out of time. Okay? So this is the paragraph that you may rely on that allows a buyer to change from a loan to cash or cash to a loan without seller authorization as long as he stays on time. Okay? This new law in 7B, I don't think it's going to make it. I think it's going to be out in one of the first edits. And that is that personal property left in a property after close of escrow is legally considered debris. That was always true. Now they're saying that the buyer must notify the seller that these items remain and give them 3 days to remove them before they destroy them. I don't see this one making it, but that's what it says. 7 now. If they leave you a couch or a car, a refrigerator, any of those kinds of things that just annoy the heck out of a new buyer, it must sit there for 3 days while you notify the listing side, which you're going to do through the delivery method that we talked about at the beginning, and I will talk about at the end. But they are now saying that you must notify the seller and give them a chance to remove them for 3 days. I can't see how this one's going to make it, but that's just my humble opinion. So 7.2 just added some language that sellers and agents don't necessarily know everything wrong with the property. Very often inspections reveal things, or living in a property and opening a wall after close of escrow reveals some things. So they just added some language that says sellers and agents may not always know everything about their property, and it sort of lays out some ground rules for the buyer to understand that. I've taken that call many times. The seller had to know, and there's no way to prove that. And so they've added some language here to say, unless you have a report or something that is dated in a certain window where you can prove that they knew, it's not necessarily true that they didn't know. I wanted you to see in number E there, the last sentence, that pool keys and mail keys and things like that, the gym keys and stuff like that for the HOAs, very often don't get transferred, and HOAs charge fees for these, and buyers get very annoyed for it. So there's just some language in there that says, if you have to go to the HOA for your pool key, we don't charge you, we're not charging you, it's not a charge in the contract, but the HOA may charge you to obtain additional keys. So we're down to B, an appraisal. I'm gonna go a little faster here. We're on page 5. So contingent upon writing. Again, no repairs are required. Nobody's required to, the seller's not required to do any repairs that are on the appraisal. Furthermore, this is a new rule. If you're going to cancel over the appraisal, you must give them a full copy of the appraisal. When I was in my CAR class, I specifically asked if we had to give it free, and the lead attorney said, I presume so. So I think there's going to be some negotiation there, whether the buyer has to hand over as a free cost to the seller a full copy of the appraisal. CAR certainly thinks that's what it means, but there's no word there that says free. So I want to bring it to your attention. There may be some negotiation still done there. I just wanted to remind you in number C, an investigation of property, over the last few years, we've all gotten used to fire insurance being hard to get. You need flood insurance. Some companies have quit writing in California altogether. So please keep in mind, especially the defensible space laws and all that, that you may have trouble getting insurance. And then I'm at the top of page 6, G. This is the one that matches the grid, that they will give you all the information you need on time so that you can deal with your solar or risk the 5-day delay that they will have to give you. And that the seller does not have to contribute any necessarily any money to make it happen. And if the buyer refuses or can't enter into, so we get to the very end and the buyer still has not finished the transfer with the, it is a cancelable offense now to not finish up once you've agreed to assume a lien of some sort. H reminds you again, that just wrote in the word down at the, on the end, the ABID, there's no obligation to remove any contingency unless they have every single thing that goes with that contingency. And if they do, they're doing it against buyer's advice. And the law says that they will be held accountable if they do it, meaning they will, there is no undoing a contingency removal that you gave away at, in purchase at the time of negotiation. I want to talk about 9A real quick, which is that it repeats for that included and excluded thing we talked about in the grid, that the anything that's in the MLS, flyers, marketing materials, all that sort of stuff that if you offered, you know, when you say the washer and dryer, refrigerator, chandeliers may stay, but you didn't ask for them, they are not part of the transaction. It is not just because an agent wrote it in the MLS. If you didn't ask for it and it wasn't answered, it is not required to stay, even if it was on the MLS. Okay? However, if it was in the property at the time of acceptance, it could be presumed to be part of the property. So watch out for things like window coverings, which now you'll see there includes blinds, curtains, draperies, shutters, or any materials that cover any portion of the window. Pool nets, those motorized things for the pool that clean the pool, those sort of things. All right. Number 4 in B4, home automation systems. This includes nests or rings. Those things are presumed to stay with the property once they're there or be negotiated. You should not presume that the nest or the ring are staying unless they've been negotiated. And then in number 5, C.A.R is mentioning that since so many people run those devices either on a tablet or their phone, that they've actually had claims where the person didn't hand over their tablet, where all the material, where all the logins and things were for that. You are a complete start over on your own device if there are electronic things in the house that need to be operated through a tablet or a phone. Okay. On number 10, which is at the top of page 7, the inspections, reports, and certificates. All it does is say who's going to do the work in the grid. I'm sorry, it only says who's going to do the inspection. Who's actually going to do the work that has to be completely separately notarized. I mean, agreed to by amendment. I apologize, I don't know where that came from. And buyers, they remind you, do not work on properties themselves, even if it's vacant, even if the seller says, okay, they either pay a licensed contractor themselves, get permission to access the property. They are not to be accessing the property and working on it themselves. Your other option is if you can deposit the money in escrow, and escrow will pay for that repair upon instruction. So please remember that we don't want buyers working on properties. Number 3, reinspection fee. This is that law I just told you where it says now that if something isn't done, either those first 3 things, smoke, water, and carbon monoxide, or repairs that you agreed to do that were subject to the appraisal, and somebody has to go back and reinspect it, those fees will now be charged to the seller. Your home warranty, there's your language in number C for the adoption that buyer shall choose the coverages regarding of any coverages indicated, and that they shall pay any cost over the top. Okay. Paragraph 11, I just marked the ABID again. I highlighted some things, the transfer disclosure statement, the defensible space stuff, and is it fully completed? So if you get a TDS where the seller has jumped over boxes or left things blank, it is not necessarily received and properly delivered. And especially if you mark your ABID on there, no matter how good the seller did on the TDS, you may be stuck with additional 5 days. be very careful on your TDSs and get those ABIDs out. Near the bottom, number 4 reminds you that at any time you become aware of something new on a property, you are to amend the TDS and send it over. It does limit, though, things you learned in an inspection. So you don't have to go back and fix the whole TDS because the inspector had 30 things on there that he wanted somebody to look at. These are things where you become aware, like a flood happens in a home, which is the most common one I have. Somebody's left some water on and now we need to revise the TDS. At the top of page 8 is the home hardening and fire space. We talked about that. And number E, you cannot waive a statutory law. NHD, TDSs, defensible space, when it's a law, that's what the word statutory means. It applies to the word statute, which is a law. So you cannot waive laws. The termination rights. So if after you, if you revise something and you give it to them and they do not disapprove it, it is assumed to be approved. So they ask for a correction or you need to give one and you make delivery and they do not say this is not good enough. It will presume to, you will not have to track that with a date from the second you send it. It will, unless they say that new information is not agreeable or I'm going to need more time, then it is presumed to be accepted. I am going to jump to page 9, paragraph 12. I just want to remind you guys, just a tip that when you're doing condos, don't order exterior condos inspections for your pest control reports. You're going to wind up knowing every termite problem in the complex instead of just the interior space. So there is, it does have a language in there for a limited inspection. Number D on page 9 says that the buyer shall make the property available for inspections, and he does not have to move any personal property, even if his garage is packed to the rafters, but he does have to keep the water, gas, and electricity on all the way through close of escrow. The inspector needs it, the appraiser needs it, and the buyer needs it at close to walk through the property. Okay. Also, here's the language that we've all known. Once a written report is existed on the property, you must give a copy of it to the seller. And if you were to fall out of escrow, you must give it to the next buyer. But this is just to remind you, the seller is entitled to a free and full copy of all inspections on his property, even if you're going to cancel and even after cancellation. This one clause survives the cancellation. Okay. In number E at the bottom of number 9, I want to remind you guys that if you don't know this, in California, if a buyer's buying cash over $300,000, title company is going to need an endorsement saying where that money came from. They know what areas have meth labs and pot growing and all that sort of stuff. So if it's over 300,000, the buyer is going to have to fill out a form for the title company explaining where that money came from. I am at the top of page 10, paragraph 14. B reminds them that they are to return the documents as well within time. They part of their any and all contingency removal is the return of the disclosures. Okay. Once, and then paragraph number B4 says that even after that once a buyer removes all his contingencies, a seller may not cancel any longer. Cancellation rights are gone up until 3 days before and 3 days after for the demand to close. So you can serve your demand to close 3 days in advance. And if they're not closed after 3 days after that, including counting a holiday or a recorder holiday, there is no cancellation rights for a seller. And if a seller cancels, they must return the deposit. Let's see. One of my favorite ones down here on page 10, paragraph E, is the notice to buyer or sellers to perform or the demand to close escrow. I have seen many notice performs where an agent who's just become unhappy has crossed out the 2 days at the bottom and written in 1 in 24 hours by 5 o'clock tomorrow. That is not true. And if they serve it to you that way, they must serve it over. It is not a good document if it doesn't have at least 2 days for the performance and 3 days on the demand to close. You cannot shorten those times. You have to give them those amount of times. Now, I had an agent call me recently and said that I guess I did the notice to perform wrong, and they're saying that I have to do it over. Is that true? And I said, not only is that true, but you're lucky they told you, because they could have just let you twist and taken all that time until you figured it out on your own that your notice to perform was not good. So if you don't give at least 2 days on the notice to performs and at least 3 days on the demand to close escrow, you must, or if you serve it wrong for some reason, it must be done over.
MJ?
Yeah.
If we can go back up to the buyer section real quick, there was a question, some confusion. So the buyers have 3 days to review all the disclosures, and if they approve, then they cannot cancel the transaction. So what is the 17 days for?
The 3 days that I think 2 of my thoughts got muddled together there. And so I'm not even sure I can answer that question exactly as it was asked, but I'll try to say it again. Once you reach the notice to perform or the demand to cancel phase, they must have a period of time. Sam, did you hear that question better than I and have an answer for me? Because it looks like you do.
So I think, well, if I'm understanding it correctly, sorry, I had to step away for a phone call. If I understand correctly, basically, if you come to a notice to perform and you have not been provided all of the correct documents, it's currently in RPA 10 in the version now, but basically 3 days is if it is handed to you, as in you have to be tangibly given the documents. 5 days is electronic or via mail, that you get the extra time if you have not been provided all the statutory and other disclosures, or if something is outstanding in the disclosures, you get the notice to perform, then they can go back and say, no, we get more time. Because I'm working on that on a file right now. Like the FHDS, as an example, is the same civil code as the TDS, which means that does invoke. So if you're not double checking, circling back to that map, and you've said, oh, it's not high fire when it is high fire, and you haven't gotten these point of sale things that may come up, you've now extended out the timeframes for the buyer to have more time for investigation and disclosures. If
Okay.
I'm answering, I think I'm answering
So
that
Betty,
correctly.
if that answered your question, great. If it didn't, ask in the chat again and we'll get it answered. Thank you.
All right, I'm on page 11. The final verification of contingency is you have 5 days to do a walkthrough, but it's not a contingency. A walkthrough is not a contingency. Just like a request for repair is not a contingency. I'll get on to now. I need to go to page 12, paragraph 21. If you close escrow with your pretty pictures on the MLS, they must remain there for the benefit of the appraisers and things going forward. So some people, when they cancel a listing, will pull their pretty pictures off, and you can still do that. But if you closed escrow, you must leave them there. Furthermore, let's say that you take 50 pictures and your MLS only allows 40 pictures to go in the MLS. You must retain the rest of the pictures you did not use for 3 years. Photography is now, and videos are now part of your transaction file, and they must be retained. Except for the people, I'm not even gonna get into how people are gonna keep track of that now, but they must be retained, including the additional photos that you didn't use on the MLS. If you took a picture of it, it may be something that solves a case down the road, and they want to keep it. Furthermore, agents are no longer responsible for what Zillow and all that do, because I've had that call as a broker as well. When I want my pictures down off Zillow, no matter how many times we've reached out, we cannot get them off. So if your pictures have gone out in the distribution or the syndication, and are out there for the world to see, there's only so much an agent can do to reel that back in. Okay. Paragraph 23 is the assignment again that you know, we talked about the assignment at the beginning, so I'll jump over that a little bit, save you guys some time. On page 13, counting days, everything ends at 11:59 p.m. I get a lot of that as well. Yes, escrow can't report after 5 o'clock, but that doesn't mean they don't get till 11:59 to before you can serve them. Right. There's an additional, we've all been used to, finally gotten used to the Saturday, Sunday, and holiday rule. An additional exception is if that county's recorder's office has to be closed for City of Riverside Day, and that county recorder's office is closed, or Cesar Chavez Day, if that county recorder's closed, they get one more day to record as well. Okay. Now, this is the really important one, K, delivery. Okay. On the final page right now, when we get there in just a moment, you're going to see that you're asked to insert an email address where you want to be delivered of things. So if you have 2 counter offers out and you're hoping all of a sudden that, because you wrote the second one after the first one and you're hoping that first one doesn't come in, or you might be a type of person who would not reveal which offer came in, your email will now reveal whose offer came in first under certain cases. So if you have something on the MLS that says submit all offers to info@, that might be great for submission, but from when you counter on, you must, and for buyers on the purchase agreement page 10, I mean, what was our page 10, page 16 now, you are going to have to put in an address that you will receive delivery at. We don't care anymore if you're in Cancun and you can't read your emails. We don't care anymore. Once it's there, and it's deemed delivered. So this is a big change. Please remember this one. I want to talk about paragraph 27, time is of the essence. C.A.R wants you to know a rule, and I have to say this rule a lot, so just take a second to talk about it, just 10 seconds. If the contingencies are due, or the seller was supposed to do something, or both parties go on vacation and there's a great big long silence and nobody, because we have files all the time that suddenly go dead and we don't know where anybody is. The rule of law is silence means silence. It doesn't mean that the buyer cancel. It doesn't mean that the seller can cancel. The rules are still the rules. You still have to serve your notice to perform. If you let 10 days go from when they were supposed to remove their contingencies to when you finally decide to do something about it, that's what they get. Silence means silence. It does not mean anything. It simply means nothing happened in that period of time. Okay. Liquidated damages at the top of 29. At the top of 29, this is again where I remind you that the 3% is only for owner-occupied transactions. And I always ask this one quick question: why would a seller not sign liquidated damages? Many people don't realize that when a seller agrees to liquidated damages, he's agreed to limit it to the law limit. When he does not limit it, he can ask for other amounts exceeding the EMD. So he might not just sue you for your EMD. He may sue you also for the moving truck that got pushed and the other things, that the other delays that you caused him. It will not be limited by the EMD. So when you see that a seller has not initialed the liquidated damages, you need to note your file. Okay, that means they have the right to exceed the EMD once they have done all the other things, served notices, mediated, and if they choose, take you to Superior Court. Okay. Mediation is required in all of our purchase contracts. It is not arbitration, and it is not liquidated damages. It is just an opportunity for everybody to sit and talk. And if you do not attend mediation and you take them to, with the exception of small claims, if you take them to a Superior Court action and you did not attend mediation and you lose, your client is going to be paying the attorney's fees for the winning side as well. So mediation is always a part of all contracts. Arbitration, which is binding, is not required by all. In the arbitration, paragraph 31, it's in B. These are the exemptions where you don't have to wait. You can go straight to, so if it's a probate or bankruptcy court, those are the two that have the highest authority over real estate, or even over the purchase contract. But the one that I use the most is small claims. So you do not, if you're going to have to argue over your deposit, you don't have to wait to mediate and take them to big court and all this stuff. You can go straight to small claims. Right? Also, this is where I remind agents not to go to mediation without your broker's knowledge. We do not want you in that room. Okay. I had a very famous broker in this town, went to mediation. It was going so well that they agreed to $1,500, and the attorneys and the agent said, oh, you know what, I'm going to write that check for $1,500 just to make this better for everybody. The attorney stopped the negotiations, removed the agent from the room, and added her to the lawsuit because he believed she just admitted guilt by offering to pay the $1,500 to wrap the matter up. So we don't want you, and you're not a party to mediation, you're not a party to this contract. You may go, but you are not a party to that, and you should be very careful what you say in that room. Okay? So we're almost there, page 15. Expiration of offer, there's the language that matches the expiration date in the grid. Here's your 32B is your entity buyers. If you know that they're a trust or if you know they're a trust or an entity. I always like Sam's comment that those entities don't have hands, so they can't sign those things. It really needs to be done correctly. I want you to see that in 32C as well as 33C, they have added a sentence that says the RPA has 16 pages. Buyer acknowledges receipt of and has read and understands every page and all attachments. A very common argument for buyers and sellers in court is that they didn't know, or they didn't see it in the fine print, or they didn't understand what they were signing. This is closing that door. If you signed it, you've now agreed that you have read it as well. Right, 33. Oh, and then I wanted you to see the, where's the delivery? Okay, and then 33A is where you can mark that you're going to sign the offer, but you're going to send a counter offer or a backup addendum. That's where the two little boxes are that we used to use on page 14. You will see at the bottom of page 15 that the presented and rejected is gone. And we're down to just offer not accepted, and that covers all the bases. It was not accepted and it was presented because here's the initial from the seller. Yep, Sam.
I'm just gonna, could you scroll back up real quick to signing on behalf of an entity? It's a thing that becomes such an issue, and I just wanted to point this out while we're looking at the contract.
I knew what you wanted, but I'm going to try to stick with you. Go ahead.
Yep, just right there. When you're signing on behalf of an entity, I highly, highly encourage you to make sure that you're providing the document, your client is providing the documentation showing they have signing authority that is due within 3 days of acceptance from the party signing on behalf of the entity to the other party in escrow. It is not escrow's responsibility to give us the trust cert. It actually is a contractual action, and you can get notice to perform on this. So have the conversation with your client when they say, I'm taking title in my trust, my LLC, blah, 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 blah. Every single one of those documents that create those entities has a document within itself that shows who's signing. I have right now today a file. Nobody would give me the documentation. We were supposed to record today. We've now delayed recording because there's a second seller who didn't sign anything. So we actually don't even have an executed contract.
I actually had a very good agent friend of mine say, okay, I called them and they said they don't know what they are. They don't know if they're a managing member. They don't know if they're an authorized signer. They just know they have an LLC. What now? And I go, well, they're going to need to call somebody. It's not just because we answered and they said they don't know. That's not good enough. Okay. They're
Well,
going,
and if they don't sign with their title, they don't have the protection of the entity, and that could become personal liability that could get you sucked into it as well. So just, it's going to become more and more of a big deal as people with their finances and everything that's going on, especially here in California.
All right, I'm on page 16, and the box that we've all been familiar with, where the agents say that there's plenty more room now for more signatures, more license numbers, fit in those pads for DocuSign. And then you see that big star I put in both places where it says that the designated electronic delivery address is. So if you start over here and thought it was over there, you're going to be stuck with the results that you put in here. So if you use something like info at, and that box gets 75 emails, contracts a day because you've got a hot listing, and the one you need's right in the middle, it's on you, not on the buyer or on that party. A designated electronic delivery is going to be very important going forward. The final thing I have to tell you is that it is not part of the RPA. The escrow piece down here, we've all been used to just getting it with the escrow instructions in a few days anyway, but they've gone on to add that it is not part of a fully executed contract. It does not have to be there for the lender or for another party to enforce a contract. It is merely an acknowledgement. It is, and it can come when it comes now. It does not have to be with the agreement. So I know that you absorbed a lot today. I hope that I was able to answer the biggest bulk of the changes for you. If now, when you take the C.A.R class, there are some credits available. It runs about $60, $65, whether you take it at C.A.R or you take it at the board. They do spend 4 to 5 hours, and they will show you every 2 or 3 times what I just went over in dot your I's and cross your T's kind of thing. So we also are getting 70 revised forms. You guys are going to need to do your templates over. You're not going to be able to use your old templates anymore. It's time to upgrade to the new RPA. So I am going to stop talking now for you. I'm sure you're all exhausted. Like I said, we stay on the line. And so Tommy, do we have questions right up? I have completed the bulk of it if you have to go, everybody, and I will stop sharing here and bring myself back to the screen. I hope you guys got the bulk of what you need to know. I think if you've been working with the contract for a long time, most of that made sense to you. Feel free to take any additional class that you feel that you need. Was there questions we can jump on, Tommy? Otherwise,
There are some in the chat that still have not been answered.
okay. I just saw one go by is when are they required? So December 20th, your old RPA will disappear on zip forms. Okay. So it will drop in November. So it will work side by side. You will actually see 2 residential purchase contracts, one with one revision date, one with the newest revision date. And then December 20th, you will not be able to access the old purchase contract anymore.
So Pam had asked the question, do the additional photos above allowed number to the MLS have to be provided to buyers as a disclosure?
No, they don't, but they just like the 2 file rule. Your broker has a file and that's the one you turn in and you got paid on, and then it turns out you've got a stack of other stuff in your bonus file back here. That is technically not the way you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to, even if you have to scan dump it all into your other file, you're not supposed to have 2 files. So it's not going to look good if you pop up a bunch of, you don't have to get it disclosed, but you do need to retain them.
Yeah, there was a couple comments in here in regards to, agents still don't understand that they need to provide the broker with all offers received, rejected.
Yes.
And, I would say with the new format of the contract there, do you see that increasing? Because, we all know that it still somewhat happens where if you submit an offer and that offer gets rejected, technically it's supposed to be initialed and signed by the seller and given back to you, right, for your file.
It
doesn't happen.
One sentence toward the end because I felt like we were so far over, but the rule now is if requested in writing, you must give it per the code of ethics.
Okay. There's one that says paragraph 19 of the current contract states the party acting in a representative capacity has 3 days after acceptance to provide evidence of authority to act. This has been a nightmare to obtain. Any advice?
So you're not always going to solve it. So this used to completely be Escrow's problem for most of my career. And when this RCSC first came up, I kind of chuckled because I know how hard it is for us, let alone for you guys. So totally respect that that is absolutely true. The problem is that the sooner we start, the better we end. So if you at least prodding them, getting the questions answered and having Escrow back you up and all that you need this sort of thing, gets you where you're going, you're not only helping yourself, but you're helping the Escrow, because we have to verify who the signer is that before we make those little signature lines at the bottom of the pages. So, and then the title company is going to want to. So yes, I agree. It is going to be hard. It is not always going to be available to you. You're not even necessarily going to know what you asked, but if they are, the other thing is that they could write as individuals and clean it up later. Before the 17 days, let's get it into your LLC. And now we've had time to pull our thoughts together and we're not doing it in negotiation. So a person could write as an individual and later move into and sooner rather than later move it into the entity that they intend. We see LLCs getting named for the actual, like people have one LLC per property these days. So we see LLCs getting created during the transaction all the time. So it's not unusual.
Well, and I'm going to give the difficult response to that too, is do not write an offer or take a listing unless your client has it, to protect yourself. I mean, I know that's not the quick way and I know everything's super sonically busy, but to protect yourself, I wouldn't move forward till you have supporting documentation.
All right, there's a whole bunch more in here. So
just before you get to that, I want to talk real quick about the number one problem with signatures is that you cannot be ABC Inc. as a signature. It needs to be Bill Smith, president, and then the LLC is something else. And the number one reason that this happens is because of the benefit that you have, that you can link your DocuSign or your electronic signature, whatever you're using, to your zip forms. Zip forms matches the signature to what you type there. And what was supposed to be there. But when you have an entity and you have to edit those signatures, you cannot, I call people all the time and tell them they don't have a legal, that person might as well have signed, they might as well have signed Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Well, and if you're purchasing a property, if they're purchasing it as an LLC or as a corporation, what have you, title is going to ask for those supporting documents. They're going to be asking for the bylaws. They're going to be asking for who is in charge and who the managing people are. So we're going to need that documentation every single time. So you might as well get it up front. There was one in here that says, is this auto-populated? I'm assuming it is based on the other one was, right?
Yes.
Okay. You already answered, when are we starting to use the new RPA?
And is the old RPA still good if your offer isn't negotiated and you go to the new one? Yep. We'll just have slightly different rules. If this happens every time we change contracts, I have to deal with an old one and they'll say, well, but this rule's not there anymore. That's exactly what happened. You're not going to have the delivery rule on the old contract that you have on the new. So if for some reason there's a period of time that you are operating with both contracts to get to close, you need to stick to the rules that are in that particular.
There's one in here that says the new RPA addresses sellers leaving personal items, but not them returning items that were to be included.
That's your basic walkthrough argument. I think we've all had that. We know where that's going.
It says in here, I believe you said something about the disclosure timeline changing. Did you say the seller disclosures must now be due to buyer within 5 days? 7,
still 7 and 17, but the 5 days that you keep hearing for the first, now we've all been threatened with that 5 days every other day of my career. I think we're going to start seeing some 5-day delays.
The other thing in
Almost 5 days.
timing that change was loan contingencies moved from 21 to 17.
Yep, that's our only time frame change.
I missed what you said about 5 days. Are we gonna have, Is it
That
gonna
was about
change
disclosures.
5 days?
Are they due to the buyer within 5 days? She said, no, it still remains 7 days. The only time frame that changed was the 21-day loan contingency is now 17 days.
thank
And
you.
then Sam said it can be a shorter period if you hand deliver it, but how many of us are driving across town to hand deliver? You know, we're most likely gonna email. So if it matters to you, 2 days gonna matter to you, you might want to drive on over.
To answer Lon Woodward's question, the new RPA with the notes is in the chat. I will upload it into the chat again. It takes a few minutes. So if you're still on, you'll be able to download that right out of the chat. Couple people asked that, so I will put that back in there. Samantha has put it in there a couple times as well. Okay, question on the date of acceptance on the contract. It is determined by, is it determined by the last signer? Quote,
We're done with
sellers
that
on RPA, buyers on SCOs, or sellers on BCOs.
Yep.
Okay, signs the form when their agent delivers that signed from the designated email address. Is that listed on page 16?
Yes.
Okay. We covered the LLC Trust Corp, pull a property profile to see how title's held. Absolutely. If anybody needs access to be able to pull profiles and documents and stuff like that, feel free to reach out to me. I could give you access to my system. I could be reached at Tommy4title.com.
And by the way, I was an old school person. I just picked up the phone, called customer service my whole career, but that doesn't work after 5 and weekends. So Tommy finally got this old codger onto that system, and I can't believe how fast I can have docs now. And property.
And then another one on auto population. It says, are the emails on page 16 auto populated from the MLS, or do the agents still need to fill them in themselves?
You're going to put it in yourself, and you can still have an info ad on your MLS. Just remember to clean it up when you counter if you're on the seller side, or that you put where you really do check your emails on the buyer side. Anybody?
Okay, so
I
there's.
Can we unmute them? They're unmuted now, or feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. Feel free to ask it. And those who would like to go on with their lives, feel free, but we will stay on and take the questions.
Yeah, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, they can and ask a question. There was one here. It says, at the beginning of a transaction, I used to send escrow an email asking if the qualified substitute will be included in the final broker package. It was always usually yes, with the very rare no. We will now act as a it says, we will now act as a qualified substitute. One time I had an escrow officer respond confirming the QS would be included in the broker package. We close. I requested the QS, and escrow at the time informed me that seller was foreign and the withholding was not made. That sounds like an escrow. MJ, you are muted.
I don't know how that happened. Sorry about that. So they, the law for FERPTA is that seller, a legal intermediary in the middle, like an escrow company, has the first responsibility to get the sworn statement, whether they are foreigner or not foreigner. I find it unusual in that question that they knew they were a foreigner and did not hold the money and send it off to the either the feds or the state. So if you want to speak to me about the particulars of that one offline, feel free to reach out to me. An escrow officer wants that kind of trouble just about as much as she wants writing herself and going off to Mexico. You know,
that was from Jennifer Rowe, just so you know. Okay.
It's really going to be a problem. So I don't know what caused them not to withhold if they knew it was a foreigner. All right.
Can I ask a question? Pamela here.
Yeah, of course.
Whenever the statutory disclosures are delivered to the buyer agent, and we talked about this earlier, and the buyer agent does not respond, what is there a period of time that's deemed acceptable? Like, say it goes for 3 days and then the buyer agent responds on day 4 or day 5. What do they have a time period that they, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
So I think you're asking me if you put them in their email and they never see them, are you helping?
Or if they don't respond, or if they don't respond and they come back 4 days later, say, oh, I didn't see them. There's no time period.
Exactly what this new delivery system is cutting out. Once you put it in their email, you have proof that it was delivered to the right place. And you know, one of the things CAR's been asking us to do for the entire COVID period was get better or feel better about negotiating with each other in difficult situations. We don't have as many
On the thing.
to, so yes, in the worst case situation, you might want to give them a day or two. That's what I tell people all the time, unless you.
There is no time period.
Yes, it's 17 days.
If complete and is sufficient to just put it in their email.
Okay.
So Pam, just to circle back, basically it's on the listing agent that you better, and the TC, make sure your disclosures are complete. You know, everybody who's worked with me knows what a charming individual I am and how much I'll kick back. We need to be checking our disclosures before they go out. It really falls on the listing side. If a
Right.
buyer side wants to sit on them and buy time, which I have actually had agents ask me to do, and then we can kick back and say, look, this is not a complete TDS. This is not another, that'll buy us 5 more days. So
Right,
it's really on the listing side.
Right, but if they're say they're fully completed and there's not a problem with them, the buyer agent, there's no time period as to when the buyer
17
agent
days.
can come back.
17, yeah, whatever's in the contract for when currently 14B, they are supposed to be returned, that's the time frame. So defaults to 17, I'm sorry, I can't tell who's.
Right, but I'm just saying that the buyer agent can't come back after 3 days and go, oh, because there was something in the contract that Mary Jane commented on that said if the buyer agent doesn't reply, can't come back, he or she can't come back and say, oh, I didn't see them. That's what I mean. There was something back there in the
No.
contract, MJ, that you referenced. I don't know where it is now. I'll have to go back.
It falls under investigation, buyer investigation. So it's the default 17 days.
Yeah.
Right, there was, I'll have to look, Mary Jane, because there was something else you talked about that I'm referencing, and I'll have to look back and see what that was.
Are you talking about changes? For example, let's say we gave them a TDS. They asked
No.
for changes, we made the changes, we gave it to them. Or are you talking about noticing to perform, let's say you give a notice to perform and nobody responds? No?
Neither. I'm talking about if the disclosures were sent, there was something back there, MJ, that if the disclosures were sent, the buyer agent can't come back and say, oh, but I didn't see them, or I didn't know.
That is the method, the new delivery.
Okay,
The minute we put them into the email and we have a paper trail of that,
that's it. Okay, there's no, I thought there was some change there. Okay, got it. Thank you.
all those little boxes are gone. I never thought in my career I'd see that little box at the bottom of the RPA gone, but they finally got rid of that box that, and by the way, nobody, and all respect to Andrew, our attorney, the only person who argued that case ever was the attorney when he was taking you apart later and recalculating all your dates off of a random delivery date that somebody wrote wrong. So this is because some people had strong date that they actually did get them yesterday because I didn't sign it yesterday, and some people felt like if they were signing it today, they had to sign it today. So, and you know, backdating rules, we do want to be careful that we're not backdating. On the other hand, if you did get them yesterday, the appropriate date that you received them. So all of that argument out the window now. You don't have to have that argument anymore. I think that's a great.
That was all of the questions in the chat.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is what we do day and night. Sam, Tommy, I, Lisa, Pam, all these TCs, and I know you guys work on it as well, but my phone number is there and my ID directly under my name here. It's there if you guys want to reach out. And by the way, we can do this all over again for your class, for your agents, or whatever needs to be done. We're happy to. All of the PCs I know are booking classes in their areas as well. So if we can be of any help to you, we would be.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here.